On January 7, 2006, Burkina Faso's security minister walked onto national television and told the country something that should shock no one at this point. They just stopped another attempt to overthrow President Ibrahim Traoré.
On January 3rd at 11 p.m., a plan was in place to destabilize the country. This was to be carried out through a series of targeted assassinations of civilian and military authorities, beginning with the neutralization of Comrade Captain Ibrahim Traoré.
This wasn't a rumor, wasn't social media panic, and wasn't propaganda. According to the government, plotters had finalized their plans to assassinate Traoré on the night of January 3rd, either by shooting him or blowing up his residence with explosives. After killing him, they planned to strike other military and civilian targets, destroy the country's drone base to prevent any military response, and then, according to officials, foreign forces would intervene on the ground to install a new government. Intelligence services intercepted the operation in its final hours. Arrests were made across the country. The situation was brought under control before a single shot was fired. And when word leaked out around 1 in the morning on Sunday, something incredible happened. Thousands of Burkinabés, most of them young, poured into the streets of Ouagadougou not to loot or panic, but to defend their president. Now let me tell you why this moment matters, because this wasn't just another failed coup in Africa. This was the 23rd reported attempt to remove Traoré since he took power in September 2022. 23 times in 3 years. That's not normal political opposition. That's not even normal instability. That's a coordinated, sustained effort to get rid of a man who clearly has enemies powerful enough to keep trying no matter how many times they fail. And here's the part that makes this all the more dangerous. Burkina Faso's government is openly accusing its neighbors of funding and organizing these plots. Security Minister Mahamadou Sana said on television that significant funding for the latest coup attempt came from Ivory Coast, with the most recent payment totaling 70 million CFA francs, roughly $115,000. He named Paul-Henri Daimiba, the man Traoré overthrew in 2022, as the mastermind behind the plot, and said Daimiba is now living comfortably in exile in Togo, coordinating operations from the safety of a foreign capital. This is explosive because Ivory Coast and Togo are both countries that stayed loyal to France even after Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, and Senegal kicked French troops out. Ivory Coast still has French soldiers on its soil. Its government has been consistently friendly to Western interests. Togo has been ruled by the same family for decades and has historically aligned with France. So when Burkina Faso says the coup was being organized from Lomé with money from Abidjan, what they're really saying is that pro-Western governments are actively trying to overthrow the leaders who broke away from Western control. They're saying this isn't just internal dissent. This is a regional proxy war, and the battle lines are drawn between countries that want independence and countries that want to maintain the old colonial relationships. Let's back up and understand who Ibrahim Traoré actually is, because you can't understand why people keep trying to kill him without understanding what he represents. Traoré is 37 years old, making him Africa's youngest head of state. He's a geologist by training, a former UN peacekeeper, and a soldier who rose through the ranks fighting jihadist groups in Mali and Burkina Faso. In September 2022, he led a coup against Paul-Henri Daimiba, who had himself seized power just 8 months earlier in January 2022 by overthrowing the democratically elected president, Roch-Marc Christian Kabore. Daimiba came to power promising to fix the country's security crisis, which had been spiraling out of control as terrorist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS killed thousands and displaced millions. But Daimiba didn't fix anything. Violence got worse, not better. Soldiers were dying on the front lines without proper equipment or support. The public lost faith. And Traoré, who was commanding troops in the field, decided enough was enough. He overthrew Daimiba and promised to do what Daimiba couldn't. Actually fight terrorism, actually protect the people, and actually take back control of Burkina Faso from foreign powers that had been pulling the strings for decades. What makes Traoré different from every other military leader who's taken power in Africa is that he didn't just talk about sovereignty and independence, he actually did it. In February 2023, his government expelled French troops from Burkina Faso after decades of French military presence in the country. He withdrew from the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, calling it a puppet of Western interests. He formed the alliance of Sahel states with Mali and Niger, creating a mutual defense pact between three countries that had all kicked out the French and were now facing the same threats from the same enemies. He nationalized foreign-owned gold mines and revoked exploration licenses that gave Western companies access to Burkina Faso's resources at bargain prices. He created a state-owned mining company and required all foreign firms operating in country to give the government a 15% stake and transfer technical skills to Burkinabe workers. He built a gold refinery so Burkina Faso could process its own gold instead of shipping it overseas. He opened closer ties with Russia, bringing in military advisors and equipment after the West cut him off. And he did all of this while wearing a red beret, speaking bluntly about imperialism and neo-colonialism, and channeling the spirit of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader who ruled from 1983 to 1987 and was assassinated in a coup widely believed to have been backed by France. Sankara is a hero to millions of Africans, especially young people, because he stood up to the West, rejected foreign debt, promoted self-reliance, and tried to build a Burkina Faso that belonged to its own people. He was killed before he could finish that project. Traoré has made it clear he intends to finish what Sankara started, and that has made him both incredibly popular and incredibly dangerous to the people who benefited from the old system. Here's what you need to understand about Traoré's popularity, because Western media keeps calling him a dictator and an authoritarian, and sure, he is running a military government that has postponed elections, restricted press freedom, and cracked down on opposition. All of that is true, but he also has genuine, massive public support. When news broke about the January 3rd coup attempt, thousands of people spontaneously flooded the streets at 1 a.m. to show solidarity with him. In April 2025, after a previous coup attempt, tens of thousands rallied in Ouagadougou waving flags and chanting his name. Videos of Traoré's speeches go viral across Africa and the diaspora, racking up millions of views. Young Africans from Senegal to South Africa to the Caribbean and the United States see him as a symbol of resistance, a leader who's finally saying no to the West and meaning it. He's been called the new Sankara, the new face of Pan-Africanism, Africa's youngest revolutionary. Some of this is genuine admiration for his policies. Some of it is frustration with corrupt, ineffective civilian governments that promised democracy but delivered poverty and dependence. And some of it, according to analysts, is amplified by Russian propaganda that promotes Traoré as a hero to undermine Western influence in Africa. But propaganda doesn't create popularity out of nothing. It amplifies what's already there. And what's there is a deep, burning frustration among young Africans who are tired of being told their countries are poor and unstable, when those countries are sitting on trillions of dollars in resources that keep getting extracted by foreigners. They're tired of being lectured about democracy by the same Western countries that supported dictators for decades when those dictators served Western interests. They're tired of watching French troops stationed in their capitals while their own people go hungry. And when a 37-year-old military officer in a red beret stands up and says, "We're done with this. We're taking our resources back. We're kicking out foreign troops. And we're going to build our own future, even if it kills us," that resonates. That matters. That's not just propaganda. That's hope. And that's exactly why people keep trying to kill him. Because if Traoré succeeds, if Burkina Faso actually becomes more stable and prosperous under his leadership, if resource nationalism and anti-Western policies actually work, then leaders across Africa will start asking why they're still letting foreign companies control their economies. If Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger build a functioning alternative to ECOWAS and successfully resist Western pressure, other countries will wonder why they're still taking orders from Paris or Washington. If a young military leader can kick out foreign troops, nationalize mines, and still maintain popular support, then every pro-Western government in Africa becomes vulnerable. That's the real threat Traoré represents. Not that he's a dictator, but that he might actually succeed in showing there's another way. This is why the coup attempts keep coming. This is why Damiba, who's been in exile since 2022, allegedly keeps plotting. This is why Burkina Faso says money is flowing from Ivory Coast, a country that benefits from staying in France's good graces. This is why every few months there's another arrest, another plot uncovered, another warning from the government about foreign interference. The stakes are massive. If Traoré falls, the entire project of Sahelian independence could collapse. Mali and Niger are both led by military governments that are less charismatic, less popular, and more isolated than Traoré. If he goes down, they might follow. And if all three go down, France and the West can reassert control over a region that's rich in gold, uranium, oil, and strategic importance. But here's what makes the January 2026 coup attempt different from the others. This time, Burkina Faso didn't just stop the plot. They're going public with details. Security Minister Sana promised to release confession videos from the arrested plotters. The government is naming names, pointing fingers at specific countries, and making it clear they're not going to keep quiet about who's behind these attacks. That's a major escalation. If Burkina Faso releases videos showing that Ivory Coast funded a coup attempt, that's not just an accusation anymore. That's evidence. That's the kind of thing that could destroy diplomatic relations, trigger sanctions, or even lead to military conflict. And that might be exactly what Traoré wants. Because the more he can prove that pro-Western governments are trying to overthrow him, the more he justifies his authoritarian measures, his crackdown on opposition, and his alliance with Russia. And Russia is absolutely part of this story. After Traoré expelled French troops, Russian military advisors and Wagner Group mercenaries moved in to fill the gap. They're training Burkinabe soldiers, providing equipment, and helping the government fight terrorist groups. But they're also there to protect the regime. When you have Russian mercenaries embedded with your military, they don't just fight jihadists. They gather intelligence, they identify threats to the government, and they make sure coup plotters don't succeed. Russia has a vested interest in keeping Traoré alive because his government is one of Moscow's strongest allies in West Africa. If he falls, Russia loses influence. So every time a coup attempt gets foiled, you have to wonder, how much of that success came from Burkinabe intelligence, and how much came from Russian advisors who knew exactly what to look for? Here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to say out loud. Traoré might be authoritarian, he might have blood on his hands from military operations that have killed civilians, and he might be delaying democracy indefinitely. But the people trying to overthrow him aren't doing it to bring back democracy. They're doing it to reinstall a government that will cooperate with Western interests, reopen the door to French influence, and go back to the system where African resources flow out and African people stay poor. This isn't a battle between democracy and dictatorship. This is a battle between one form of control and another. The West wants compliant leaders who will sign favorable contracts and host foreign troops. Russia wants allied leaders who will reject Western influence and buy Russian weapons. And ordinary Burkinabés are caught in the middle, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone will actually govern for their benefit instead of for foreign powers. The fact that thousands of people rushed into the streets at 1 a.m. to defend Traoré tells you something important. They believe he's fighting for them, even if he's not democratic, even if his government has committed abuses, and even if the security situation is still terrible. They believe he's the only leader who's actually challenging the system that's kept Burkina Faso poor for decades. And as long as they believe that, he's going to survive these coup attempts. Because you can't overthrow a leader who has the streets. You can't kill a president when thousands of citizens are willing to die to protect him. That's not propaganda. That's power. So what comes next? More coup attempts, almost certainly. More accusations against Ivory Coast and Togo. More Russian involvement. More instability, but also more defiance. Traoré isn't backing down. The alliance of Sahel states isn't collapsing. And the project of building an independent, sovereign West Africa that doesn't answer to Paris or Washington is continuing, messy and violent and imperfect as it is. Whether that project succeeds or fails, whether Traoré becomes a hero or a cautionary tale, whether Burkina Faso gets better or worse under his rule, all of that remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, the battle for control of West Africa is not over, and the people trying to remove Ibrahim Traoré are not giving up. They'll try again. And if history is any guide, he'll survive again. Because 23 coup attempts in 3 years, and he's still standing, that's not luck. That's someone who knows his enemies are watching and is determined to outlast them all.